back on at 11:51. Mr. Streisfield, you're moving on. Yes.
There we go. So on the subject matter of parking, I want to, if I could, pull up Exhibit 24, consecutive page 231. And this is the witness statement of Jonathan Chai. And if I could take you, Exhibit 24, consecutive page 231, paragraph 28.
Perhaps if there's a reference in, if that's in the city's document book.
It's Exhibit 24. Mr. Chai's witness statement.
I have a USB with everything on it. Might be easier to find it. No. My apologies, Mr. Chairman. The only free exhibits are in this box before me, and this is Exhibit 2.
Is that the compendium of city witness statements?
Yes, I think it might be.
So, okay, so even if you use that,
That's
and
Mr. Dahl's witness statement. Or Mr. Chai, sorry.
so
Yes,
Mr.
I have
Chai, is it consecutively numbered, like 230?
Yeah,
Okay.
It starts at 223.
Okay, so we're going to go to 231,
Okay.
and then we're going to come back to 274.
Yes, I have that.
Okay, so in Exhibit 24, consecutive page 231, paragraph 28.
Yes.
By the way, you were here for the parking
Yes.
evidence? Okay. My understanding, just reading the words and hearing the evidence of Mr. Dow, was that the parking rates that are being proffered, their recommendations are just seen as a base case. See that?
Yes.
And there's a suggestion there that you can get further reductions later.
Yes, he goes on to state further reductions such as those proposed in the Lee report may be considered on a site-specific basis, subject to appropriate TDM plans and a TDM study.
So are you satisfied then, since you're the planner who's proffering the bylaw, that where we're dealing with a key development area, parking standards and recommendations should be seen as a base case only?
It's my opinion that the parking work that has been done, the policies and the implementing ratios are appropriate for the KDA. And as Mr. Chai indicates, any site-specific further reductions should be seen on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. And as I understand it, if we go to Mr. Dow's witness statement, Exhibit 26, a consecutive page 274. So hopefully that's in your document book.
Yes, I have that.
Okay. So hopefully we're going to get into a planning question now. On paragraph 20 of his witness statement, he describes two approaches to parking supply.
Yes, I see that.
Okay. And he indicates approach 1, which is to introduce reduced parking rates, but require the specific TDM measure identified in the zoning bylaw. Right?
Yes,
So approach 1 is to put TDM measures inside the zoning bylaw.
correct.
And approach 2 is to introduce rates and require TDM to justify something else later.
Correct.
And he claims that approach number 2 is the preferable approach here in this proceeding. And that's why we have whatever the zoning bylaw shows for parking standards. Whatever it shows, it's only based on approach 2.
Correct.
And so my question to you is, do you agree that it is appropriate to use approach 2 over approach 1 with respect to parking standards?
Yes, I would concur with Mr. Dahl's opinion that the second approach, which is the approach provided by the city's parking experts, is the appropriate approach, which enables parking rates to be provided for in the zoning bylaw, and then requires a TDM strategy, and again, based on the extensive list in the secondary plan, to seek any further site-specific reductions. And that would be based on site-specific conditions or a particular development that may come forward.
Okay, so if we've learned anything today, you're going for approach number 2 over approach number 1.
That is what has been presented, and I would support that, yes.
Okay. Now, because you're supporting approach number 2, can you explain what process would need to occur in order to get reduction under process number 2? How do I get reductions?
To the required,
I'm just clarifying. If we accept the parking standards that are being proffered by effectively through HDR as the base case, what is the process that is envisioned whereby I would get reductions?
if you were to seek further reductions, you would require further amendment to the bylaw or a variance depending on the timing.
So is it not the case right now that the bylaw that's being proffered here would still require another planning process?
No, because the parking ratios, in my opinion, based on the evidence, are appropriate, and a development can be put forward that complies with those ratios, as in fact is the case for some of the developments that are going forward on the basis of those parking ratios that are in the zoning bylaw.
And how would you know that? Have you seen those developments that they meet the standard?
Yes, the applications that have been proposed to comply with the parking requirements in the zoning bylaw are again, based on the witness statements of those planners, have indicated that they will comply.
And as I understand it, the process that's being proffered here will require a further either rezoning or variance application, correct?
Only if the parking ratios that are presented in the current bylaw if the development that's proposed is not in compliance with those parking ratios, there would be a requirement for a further adjustment. Yeah.
And is that, in your view, consistent with the notion of as of right zoning, where all one would need to do is file for site plan, what you've just described?
It is, in terms of a development application meeting the requirements in the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw sets out, in my opinion, appropriate standards, including parking ratios, and one can choose to implement those ratios, which developers have chosen to do in terms of seeking approvals or adoption of the current zoning bylaw.
My understanding is when you say developers, let's be clear, and maybe I've got it wrong, but I didn't hear anything from anybody owning land on the east side of Yonge Street that they were accepting the parking standards. Now, maybe I'm mistaken.
No, that would be correct.
That would be correct. Sorry, that the landowners, is it your information that the landowners on the east side do not accept the city's parking standard?
It's my understanding that the landowners on the east side maintain a phase 2 appeal to the zoning bylaw, which would include the parking ratios.
Okay, so you agree with me that the landowners on the east side do not accept the parking standard that you're proffering here? Thank you.
Here's your witness.
And any reason you can think of why, for example, in this parking bylaw that you're proffering to the tribunal, why it doesn't have a requirement for car share, as an example?
I would have to defer to the experts on parking. Again, car share could be an element of a TDM measure that could be sought to further reduce standards.
So your view is, by the way, I take it you are aware that in the zoning bylaw that's being proffered, there is no requirement for car share. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to be clear. You're saying, I want to be clear. You're saying to this tribunal, it's okay. We can give you a bylaw that doesn't have a requirement for car share. Is that what you're saying?
The current bylaw provides for parking ratios that are supported by evidence. If someone was seeking to reduce those by introducing car share for the purposes of reduction, that would be available through, again, the phase 2 hearing or through site-specific amendment.
As a general principle, overarching document then, car share, in your view, is not required?
As part of the zoning bylaw, no.
Okay. And for the record, I take it you are aware that the parking strategy and proposed amendments next seeks to the bylaw that was adopted includes car share?
I would have to confirm that. It's my understanding that they've set forward a number of provisions as part of the phase 2 hearing.
I understand you keep on referring to this thing about the phase 2 hearing. I just want to go back to the first point. You understand that, for example, in the Lee next position bylaw, we are saying that car share parking should be included KDA-wide. You understand that?
It's my understanding. I just can I just defer? I believe Mr. Manette raises that in his recommended modifications as well. I just don't have the specific section.
Okay. And also in our parking standard that we think should go KDA wide, we think there should be provision for electric vehicle charging stations.
I recall, again, in the recommended modifications from Mr. Manette, I recall something with reference to charging stations as well. I just, again, don't have that specifically. I'm just looking for it now.
So let me ask you, I'll take you to the references.
Okay.
If I'm mistaken, presumably somebody out there will let me know. So we're proposing that there should be car share and, amongst other things, electric vehicle charging stations.
Yes.
And the bylaw that you're proffering to the tribunal doesn't have those items. Yes?
Correct.
Thank you. And is it your view that those, let's talk about electrical vehicle charging station. Is it your view that in this day and age that we shouldn't be including any requirements for electrical vehicle charging stations in a key development area on a citywide basis, on a KDA-wide basis? Is that what your view is? We shouldn't be doing that?
It's my opinion it's not required to be provided in the zoning bylaw.
No, that's not the question. The question is it your opinion sitting here today that it is not appropriate to include provision or requirement for electrical vehicle charging stations in this bylaw?
It's my opinion that it's not required as a standard in the zoning bylaw.
Okay. And sorry, when you say not required, do you mean that you don't think that it is necessary to have a provision?
Well, it's the regulation of a use, building, or structure.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, it's not required to have a requirement for electric charging stations as part of the zoning bylaw.
Okay. And thank you. Now, I do want to move to a different area.
I'm not sure how generous Mr. Kushner was in the give and take on timing. And I don't know whether it's gone over any agreed time, but you're going on to another area now?
Bernard Bus Terminal. I'm going to the Bernard Bus Terminal as an issue. That's a phase 1 issue, I believe.
Okay.
Chair, just for assistance, the hearing plan had contemplated
75 minutes.
Yeah, that we would continue with Ms. Anderson's cross-examination and re-examination until 1 p.m. We certainly have no issue with exceeding that by a reasonable period of time. I would point out, though, that Ms. Anderson has a hard stop at 2:45 p.m. today. We certainly anticipated we would be well completed all of her evidence in cross and re-examination by that time at the very latest, and hopefully sooner than that.
You noted the comments.
Now, we're going to deal with the Bernard Bus Terminal. Okay. We're good? Okay. Now, as I understand it, with respect to Exhibit 36, your evidence in connection with Exhibit 36, which preceded Exhibit 35, is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So before Exhibit 35 came into existence, you were of the view, based on the adopted secondary plan, that the Bernard bus terminal should be fixed and located in the southeast quadrant. Is that correct?
Can just refer to.
You did not want any changes to the Bernard bus terminal policies when you originally wrote your witness statement. Is that correct?
I had not identified, however, just in my reply, I did. Yes. So in my original witness statement, I identified my summary evidence in relation to the section of the secondary plan that deals with the Bernard bus terminal. And in my reply witness statement, I made reference to the review of Mr. Swinton's witness statement and his proposed modifications, and my opinion that those modifications or further modifications were appropriate. And to assist the board, I provided some wording in relation to that in my reply witness statement. And then subsequent to that, based on further discussions between the parties, the further proposed modifications in Exhibit 35 were put forward. And that was in relation to changing the requirement from specific to the southeast quadrant to the KDA in general.
Okay. So the way I understood it, when you first prepared your witness statement, you were saying that the location is fixed, yes, in the southeast quadrant?
As the wording was, yes.
Yes. And then something happened and you're saying it's no longer fixed, correct?
Well, I would qualify that the something that happened was in review of other evidence and information from other professional planners. I viewed those suggested modifications and believed those were appropriate.
Okay. So when you first turned your mind to it was appropriate to have this, is the Bernard bus terminal, in your opinion, a key piece of regional transportation infrastructure? Would you agree with that characterization? Key piece of regional transportation infrastructure.
A key piece of transportation infrastructure, yes.
Okay, thank you. And as I understand it, you have just told us that your opinion changed from originally agreeing with what staff had proposed and recommended, which was that the bus terminal remain in the southeast quadrant, right?
I'm going to object, Mr. Chair. I think that's grossly unfair to the witness. She just went into considerable detail to discuss the process by which her opinion evolved based on consultation with other professionals.
Right. Are we repeating that? I think she's already answered it.
Yeah, she has answered.
She changed.
So can you answer this question then? On the assumption that your opinion has evolved to a flexible location for the Bernard bus terminal, is it your opinion that if the location of this bus terminal is to remain flexible, it would still meet a notion of good planning, good comprehensive planning?
As a concept in terms of the location, I think it's appropriate to amend the policy to recognize that the bus terminal is to be supported by development within the KDA and not just the southeast quadrant. That's the difference in the policy. It's not a suggestion of another location. It's the reference that said development within the southeast quadrant shall support the redevelopment. And the change to the wording, which I believe is appropriate, as was presented by Mr. Swinton and discussed with others, is that development within the KDA shall support the potential redevelopment of the bus terminal. And I think that's an appropriate change to the policy to reflect the fact that, as I just said, it is a critical piece of transportation infrastructure within the KDA. The additional changes to the wording reflect the process through which the ultimate size and location will be determined. And again, that wording is appropriate, as it would refer to in, I think it's Exhibit 35, a number of ways in which that process through an environmental assessment would take place, and the process through which that determination would take place. And so there's defined certainty in the policy now that reflects that, which I believe is an improvement for clarity for the policies.
So have we moved the location of the bus terminal out of the quadrant? Because my understanding is that TSMGC's argument is that the bus terminal should not be on its lands. It can go anywhere.
Well,
and I understood that this policy was drafted to remove the fixed location of it from the southeast quadrant, and then therefore it's no longer fixed. Is that the case?
So the wording in the original policy, and I would read this is in section 12.4.2 under transit and subsection 4. The original wording spoke to development within the southeast quadrant shall support the potential redevelopment of the bus terminal as an integrated use within the Bernard KDA. So it's referencing that the southeast quadrant development is to support that relocation. The inference being that it is fixed to that southeast quadrant. The change in the policies is that development within the KDA shall support the potential redevelopment, so as not to refine it to a particular quadrant, or to refine it, more importantly, to the supportive development for that bus terminal. That's the clarification in policy that I believe was important and appropriate to put forward.
So we now have a floating bus terminal. It's not fixed anymore by your amended section Exhibit 35 policy language. We've gone from fixed to floating.
It's gone from development just within the southeast quadrant to supporting that to development within the KDA to support that.
Okay, no, well, we can support it. We just need to know, have we gone from a fixed location or to a floating location?
We have gone from the wording that referenced development in just the southeast quadrant supporting that redevelopment to wording that provides for development within the KDA to support the potential redevelopment as an integrated use serving the Bernard KDA. And then it goes on to say that the ultimate size and location, again, in compliance with secondary plan and through an environmental assessment if one is required. And then it goes on to speak with greater clarity to requirements for compensation. So the change to the policy in the wording is that Bernard bus terminal is to be supported by development within the KDA.
Right, and where is it to be located under the new versus the old?
Again, the size and location based on these policies is to provide for that exact location. So it's subject to that environmental assessment if one is required.
So it could go onto North Elgin's lands.
This policy would not preclude that. That's correct.
It could go onto Dogliola's lands.
This policy would not preclude that.
It could go onto Yonge MCD's lands.
This policy would not preclude that.
And so my question then becomes, since we now have a policy for a floating piece of infrastructure, how can you have as of right zoning if nobody knows where this bus terminal is going to go?
Again, based on developers coming forward with their development applications, the final location, the location could stay exactly where it is and be redeveloped in that location and expanded. Again, it's subject to a further process. And so the nature of the policy is that development within the KDA shall support the redevelopment of the bus terminal.
That part of it, I have no difficulty with the supporting. I'm only interested in the location. So I'm going to just continue on this location. You started this hearing when you took on this file agreeing that the policy for the location of the bus terminal was fixed. Is that correct?
The policy was that development within the southeast quadrant would support the potential redevelopment, correct?
The bus terminal wasn't moving. When your witness statement,
Yes,
the bus terminal wasn't moving. Now the bus terminal, supposedly by this proposed amended policy language, has it potentially moving, correct?
it is less restrictive, yes.
I think this is at least the third time she's pointed it out.
And we do understand what she's saying about the policy.
So do we know when it's going to move or if it's going to move?
Again, it would be subject to a process as is now set out in this policy that speaks specifically to the size and location of the terminal shall be determined, and this is from the original policy, in consultation with the transit authority and all stakeholders, ensuring maximum utility and efficiency of service over the long term. It goes on to say that through an environmental assessment if one is required, and then it goes on to speak about the acquisition of land by the region, and it goes on to speak about reasonable compensation through various means.
Are you aware that Mr. Manette has indicated through his witness statement that the bus terminal shall not move?
Yes, from his witness statement, I understand he supports the original policy, yes.
He supports the notion that the bus terminal will not move from its current location within the southeast
That's the
quadrant.
second time, sir.
Yes.
Don't repeat.
If the bus terminal is a key component of the transit infrastructure, then shouldn't its location be determined as part of a phase 1 hearing approval?
Well, it exists today, and its redevelopment or relocation would be provided for through a future process, but it exists today to support the KDA.
If the bus terminal has the potential of moving to a different location, shouldn't we wait for that determination to be made?
Well, it's the potential redevelopment or relocation. So as a result of it being potential, it exists today and is supportive today. If it is to redevelop and relocate in the future, it would be subject to a process.
If we don't know where this bus terminal is going, isn't it not premature to approve any part of this secondary plan?
No, I would disagree. The bus terminal exists today. If and when it is to be potentially relocated, that would occur, and redeveloped, that would occur through a future process.
And I take it that no part of the bus terminal as a piece of infrastructure, it's not referred to in this holding provision that you're proffering, right?
Oh, it's an existing facility. It'll retain its function. If and when it's determined that it needs to expand or relocate, it would be subject to a further process, but it would be maintained in terms of its function.
Right. So I'm just trying to get a little ahead of myself. The holding provision is based on some regional infrastructure, something happening with it. It's getting built. Yes?
Yes, and the Bernard bus terminal exists today and will continue to function in its capacity today.
Should we not at least have the location determined before we even lift a holding provision?
It's determined based on the fact that it exists today, and this policy speaks to the potential redevelopment of that terminal.
Now, as I understand it, at Exhibit 1, tab 41 of the joint document book, Exhibit 1, tab 41 of the joint document book, I believe we have a regional staff memo indicating that the current location is preferred.
For some reason, I'm getting an error message. Location's not available for the joint document book. I apologize. Make sure the device or drive is connected to the disk inserted. Try again. Okay. For some reason, it's not letting me open it here.
It'll be up in 1 second.
Sorry about that. Okay, great. Oh, I see. It's a bit small.
So I think I have to go to page 3124. Let's see here.
Sorry. 41. 3124. What's further in the tab?
There we go. So we're looking at Exhibit 1, tab 41, consecutive page 3124.
Yes.
And we have this February 11th email from Augustine Cole, who apparently is going to be my witness. And what you see in green is me. So I just want to point out that for now, they're being told that the preferred location is the current location at the southeast corner. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So my question to you is, or I'm going to put it to you, that it makes no sense, it is not good planning to proffer a policy for approval that has the effect of leaving a major piece of infrastructure, the location of that major piece of infrastructure, unknown going forward.
And I would suggest to the members that that's not what this policy does. This policy, in fact, references exactly the point Mr. Coe makes in this memo, and that is that intensification is to take advantage of planned and existing infrastructure, which as it exists today, the Bernard bus terminal is in place. And this policy in the secondary plan references development within the KDA shall support the potential redevelopment of that terminal. And he even indicates that a new and expanded terminal is only required because of plans to build to the highest extent contemplated, which, as we know through the KDA, is a long-term evolving redevelopment plan.
I understand what Mr. Coe has said there, and we'll come and ask him what he actually means by what he said. But I just want to understand, how is it your opinion that we can have a floating policy on major infrastructure? That's it. It's either floats or doesn't float.
So again, in response, it's not a policy that's promoting a floating location. It's indicating that there's the potential for the redevelopment of that terminal, which could be in situ or could be another location, which would be subject to a further process. And it's to be supported by development in the KDA as a whole.
And
The panel understands this, Mr. Streisfield. It really does. Thank you.
and then I'm just going to page 3125. Sorry, I'm still on page 3124. Are you aware of any study that the region had undertaken which confirms that a new and expanded bus terminal is only required because of plans to build to the highest extent contemplated by this modified secondary plan?
Again, based on the region's participation in the KDA secondary plan, there are policies that relate to the Bernard bus terminal. There are policies that refer to, in the narrative, that continue growing transit demand, and the Bernard bus terminal will maintain its function as a transit hub. So the region is very well aware of the current Bernard bus terminal's function and maintenance. And this additional policy provides for the redevelopment of that terminal in situ or potentially at an alternative location through a future process. That's my understanding. And the region supports that modified policy.
Do you know, I'm just on page 3125 now. And we still, I guess it's another email from Augustine Coe from the region, who will be testifying at some point. You see where I've underlined the reference to you're wanting to put on-street parking on the regional right-of-way, which is on Yonge Street. And as I understand it, as of February 2020, the region is saying they'll only consider it if there is a comprehensive area-wide parking strategy study. See that?
Yes.
Is there an area-wide parking strategy study that you're aware of?
I believe Mr. Dahl referenced that is ongoing for 2020 in his evidence.
Just how many studies are ongoing that you refer to in your witness statement?
I understand from the evidence again that the parking strategy is ongoing. I understand also that the MESP work that was completed is updated and continuing.
And then, so that's 2?
And then I also understand, as it relates to the policies, that there would be the study and related to stratification that would be citywide, that would be addressed.
So that would be 3.
Yes.
And I thought there was something on housing and homelessness plans or something like that.
There's usually
housing affordability study.
And there would be an annual report that's done by the region that would reference that. And I believe you're correct. There is a housing. I have to go back and look at my notes from discussions with staff.
Okay. And moving to this trend, the signal that is shown on Exhibit 29. That is supposed to connect between the west quadrant and the east quadrant, the north quadrant. You know what signal I'm talking about?
On the schedule?
On the schedule.
I'm just turning to that now. Yes, on Schedule 4, there's a potential signalized intersection location, yes.
And I wasn't clear as to the timing of this signal from all of the evidence and the materials that I had read. Do you know what the timing of this signal is?
I can't recall offhand.
So my understanding is that, first of all, would a signalized intersection on Yonge Street form part of transportation infrastructure?
Yes.
Okay. So if we look at the holding provision, whether it's from the secondary plan or the zoning bylaw, am I correct that there is no reference in the holding provision to either the Bernard bus terminal expansion and or the timing of the installation of this signal and or the signal and an intersection? None of those items are referred to in the hold, correct?
Yes, if I'm referencing the policies that relate to the York Region capital projects that are to be completed as they're listed, and the two that you mentioned are not included in that list.
So is it your view then that a future signal and or future relocation of the bus terminal, they were either missed out or they're not necessary to be included in a hold?
In relation to the way that the holding provisions are structured, they're related to capacity. And so based again on the city's evidence, they would not be required for those thresholds, as I believe the city's witnesses put forward, and they identified the ones that are required for the different thresholds.
So if you follow the logic, the way you've explained it, if they're not listed, they're not required for the threshold. And what I would say to you is if you follow that, the reason why they're not listed is because they're not necessary.
Sorry, not necessary for the hold or not necessary more generally?
Not necessary for a hold.
They're not necessary based on the projects that are contemplated that relate to, again, the threshold of development in terms of population and jobs.
So I want to be clear then, if a traffic signal is not necessary, that would mean that the landowners, all landowners in the KDA can develop their lands up to the maximum densities with no traffic signal, correct?
No, that's not correct.
Okay, so then you explain to me how this hold works, because if it's not listed, we're going to need to know how it works.
So if I can refer to the zoning, the proposed zoning bylaw, and there are, in addition to, and this is, I'm not sure the easiest place to find this, but it is in the proposed zoning bylaw, and it would be starting at page 40. Bigger copy, I can't see.
I'm assuming that the zoning bylaw that you're talking about can also be accessed in my
Yes.
Exhibit 33, tab 20.
Yes.
Okay. So Exhibit 33, tab 20, page 41. It
Yes.
looks like,
Yes, there is, it's section 5.34,
yes,
and it is referencing holding provision, which would apply. And it notes that it applies and that an H has been placed pursuant to section 36 and the City of Richmond Hill official plan, which would include, as amended, which would include the secondary plan policies that relate to the threshold. So those are to be regarded here. And then it goes on to state that lands as shown on the schedule with the H shall be subject to the following. And it goes on to list a number of provisions, and included in those provisions are item, and I believe based on the modifications, it's item E, Roman numeral 5. And it references a transportation planning study and a transportation demand management strategy, which demonstrates to the satisfaction of council or other approval authorities that the proposed use of the lands, building, and structures complies with the requirements of section 125421 of the official plan. And then it goes on to require a functional servicing report. So this would require a transportation planning study to be done. And I would say that through those planning studies, based on the proposed development, requirements through site plan or subdivision could be for transportation improvements, which is standard in planning process, that someone coming forward with a proposal may trigger the requirements for certain transportation improvements. That would include at the time of a site plan, for instance, a road widening. It could include at the time of the development application, the requirements for either new signals or improvements to signals, or things like left turn lanes or certain other changes. And so those could come forward through the site plan process as requirements for ingress and egress as it would relate to the particular development.
I thought that the studies that are required to determine whether or not there's going to need for a signal had to be done now for the purposes of this secondary plan. Am I missing something?
I'm referencing the timing. You're relating the timing or whether or not these would be within the threshold. And I'm suggesting that the timing for those improvements would come through as a result of the development applications coming forward.
Why would that be the case if it's a major piece of infrastructure and it's not even referred to as even necessary by your own holding requirement? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, are you referencing the bus terminal or the signalized intersection?
The signal and the bus terminal. The bus terminal is not expanding. Let's assume the bus terminal is not expanding. We know that exists, right? But we're dealing with the signal doesn't exist.
Right, and the zoning bylaw refers back to the requirements in the secondary plan, which includes a schedule showing a potential signalized intersection, which would then be considered through the development application process.
So this is where I guess the confusion lies then. My understanding from the evidence of HDR is that the signal had to be in operation for all of this density, the 4.0 FSI overall, to be supportable. Am I missing something?
No, and again, the evidence is that the timing of that would be determined through development applications.
So, okay. The timing of whether there should be a future signal is a subject matter of future development applications.
Correct.
Can't recall the outside time that you had mentioned for the completion of.
I indicated that Ms. Anderson had a hard stop at 2:45 p.m. today. So that would include all cross-examination and re-examination. At this point, I expect I might have about 15 or 20 minutes of re-examination.
Okay. So we got to squeeze in some lunch as well. So we're going to do that now. And we'll do 3/4 of an hour. And then we will watch very carefully so that everyone who remains in the process to deal with the witness will have an opportunity. So lunch, 45 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay.